What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Jake Peffer here, and with the upcoming release of Fast X or Fast 10 or Fast and Furious 10, whatever you want to call it, I have decided to go through and take a look at every entry in the Fast and the Furious franchise. Now, this has been a long time coming with this series. We're going all the way back to 2001 for the Fast and the Furious, the original movie in the series that started it all. Just up the top, I want to let you guys know we'll have some spoilers. It's a 22-year-old movie, so I'm going to talk about it a little in depth. So if you haven't seen the movie, check it out before watching the review. But if you have seen it, let's continue on then. So with this particular movie, this is kind of a staple in the action movie genre that we've had for, 20 plus years now. And the original Fast and the Furious movie came at a time where, I think everybody for the most part enjoyed this, but nobody ever really thought it would take off as a huge franchise that it became to be. And with the first movie, it's a solid movie. Like, it works well. It's got interesting characters and it's got some interesting things going on. Not every part of it works all that well. And for me personally, it's not one of my favorite in the series. A lot of people tell you the original's the best, or only watch the first three. Don't watch the later entries in the series where it gets all crazy and it's not about street racing anymore. But here's the thing: when you watch this movie, it's really not all that much about street racing. Like, yeah, there's some street races, maybe 2 or 3 in this one, if that. And while that's cool, those aren't the parts of this movie, or any of the movies for that matter, that really interest me. The interesting stuff is everything that's happening outside of that. Starring in this movie, you got Paul Walker, who's playing Brian O'Connor. He's an undercover cop that infiltrates a street racing crew led by Vin Diesel, who plays Dom Toretto. He's got a whole crew of guys, and Michelle Rodriguez, as well as his sister, Jordana Brewster. They run the show. They run the streets of LA. They are the best street racers around, more so him than the rest of the crew, but it's beside the point. But the reason why Brian is trying to infiltrate this crew is because there is a crew of people that have been stealing off these trucks DVD players and TVs. They have DVD VCR combos, if you can even believe that people would steal such a thing in 2023. But this was 2001, and those were a hot commodity at the time. So he's infiltrating to find out who is exactly stealing these, and he doesn't want it to believe that it is Dom and his crew, because once he gets in with the gang and gets cool with them, he actually likes Dom and the rest of the people in the crew, and he appreciates them, and he wants to learn from them despite having to possibly take them down, as part of his undercover duties. And it's an interesting back and forth that you get between Paul Walker and Vin Diesel, as well as the rest of the cast. A lot of people will say this is a blatant ripoff of Point Break, which came out in the 90s. And it is. It's literally Point Break, but instead of surfing, it's street racing. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. I mean, it does get very close to being very similar to some of the aspects of Point Break as well, down to some of the finer details even. But beside the point, I mean, you've got some people in this movie that I think give good performances, and I think the characters actually work pretty well for this to be a movie that's all about, macho, tough guys and only care about cars and street racing and things like that. It's actually written fairly well. There's some good dialogue here. There's some iffy dialogue from time to time. It's not always perfect, like I said. There are some characters they feel like just throwaway characters. Honestly, the rest of Dom's crew, like Jesse and Vince and Leon, all feel like they could maybe not really be in this movie. Jesse feels like a very throwaway character, and maybe it's more the actor who's playing him, I don't think, does a very good job, but they try to build him up as this, character you're supposed to sympathize with. And then when he inevitably gets killed at the end of the movie, you're supposed to feel sympathetic. And I'm like, who's this guy again? Because he really didn't have a lasting impression on me. The other guys, Vince and Leon actually leave a little bit more of an impression on me, which is crazy because Leon is the only person in Dom's crew who has never returned in any of these other movies. And even in this first movie, they give him very little to do. He's basically just the lookout guy for him. And then Matt Scholes, who plays Vince, you know, he does a good enough job as the asshole, the guy who wants to get Mia, Jordana Brewster's character, but Paul Walker's kind of swooping in and taking her away from him. And, you know, it builds an interesting dynamic between those two characters as well. Jordana Brewster, I think, is fine here. Michelle Rodriguez is good too. You have some smaller performances from people like Ted Levine, who is kind of the higher up for Brian O'Connor's character. I think he does a good job. You have cameos from people like Ja Rule, because this was 2001 and he was one of the biggest, you know, artists in the rap community. And honestly, one of the reasons I wanted to go see this movie so much in 2001 is because Ja Rule was in it. You know, I liked Ja Rule at that time. And I'm honestly glad that he didn't return in any of these movies, because his cameo is pretty terrible, but honestly, not the worst cameo by a rapper in this series. We'll get to that in a future video. But yeah, I mean, the action sequences in this movie are top notch. There's really not a lot of CGI. It's pretty much all practical effects, which I can appreciate, because in some of the later movies, they do get a little CG heavy. But for the most part, this is a series that's been able to carry on using practical effects for the most part when they're able to. Obviously, the stunts get a little bit crazier as this series goes on, so naturally they're going to have to utilize some CGI. But in this one, like I said, for the most part, it's pretty much all practical, and it all looks really good. It's all shot really well. This movie is directed by Rob Cohen, who is honestly is not a very good director. This is arguably his best movie, which is saying something, because like I said, this movie's good, but it's not, you know, the greatest thing ever. But he doesn't have a very good track record outside of this movie, and he makes some questionable choices throughout this movie. The villain, for instance, I'm not a big fan of, and I don't know if that's more so the way he's written, the actor that plays him, the direction that is given to the actor by Rob Cohen. All in all, the villain here is very weak, and that's one of the other missteps I think this movie has. There's also some weird effects throughout the movie that I don't like. Throughout the races, you get like we're hitting the NOS button and we're going inside the car and looking at all the different tubes and things like that. And it's like, yeah, I could really do without all that. I don't need to see that. There's also some really lame effects when it shows the cars going really fast in these races. They look terrible. There's some weird slow-mo at the end of this movie when you have the final race between Dom and Brian, where they're racing to get past the train that's coming at them. There's some weird like slow-mo where it's slowing down, but everything's super blurry, and I'm like, this just doesn't look good. You know, it was 2001. We were trying out some things like that. But yeah, I mean, all in all, this movie is very solid. It's a good starting point to this series. Had you just made this movie and not made any sequels after it, would have been totally fine. People probably would have forgotten about this movie. It'd be more of an underrated gem at that point. But because you have all those sequels and things to grow on from this first movie, you know, it definitely adds a little bit more to this movie's legacy, because it's the original. You know, it's what got these characters started. And it's a good enough movie. It's very entertaining. It's very action packed. You know, there's some funny moments here and there, intentionally and unintentionally. But for the most part, it works. And even though it's a ripoff of Point Break, it separates itself enough to make things work well. And overall, it's just an enjoyable ride. No pun intended. It's fun. It's entertaining. It's a nice thrill ride. You know, there's a lot going on here, and it's a good setup for what we see to come later on in the series with these characters. And it's a nice stepping stone that we get introduced to these characters. And, you know, from here on out, things just get crazier and crazier. But yeah, that's about it for me, guys. If you have seen The Fast and the Furious, please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for the rest of my reviews in the Fast and the Furious series, leading all the way up to Fast X. I'll leave all my links down below on where you can follow me and check out more of my written reviews. And until next time, I'll catch you all later.